Stop the drill. The sharp voice cut across the training range so suddenly that dozens of heads snapped in the same direction at once. For a moment, the entire field seemed to freeze. The morning air hung cool over the base as rows of recruits stood ready for one of the most important live training exercises of the week. Boots were planted in the gravel. Instructors moved between lanes checking equipment and procedures. Everything had been prepared down to the smallest detail. Then one young recruit brought it all to a halt. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in courage and respect, hit like and subscribe. These stories inspire change. And we're glad you're here. Now, back to Emily Carter. Recruit Emily Carter stood near the back of the formation, her hands still raised. At 22 years old, she was one of the newest arrivals at the training center. She wasn't the strongest recruit. She wasn't the loudest. She wasn't the one instructors remembered first when calling roll. Most people barely noticed her. Standing 5 feet 6 inches tall with her blonde hair secured neatly beneath her patrol cap, Emily looked like the kind of recruit who preferred staying out of the spotlight. Until now. Across the range, several recruits exchanged confused glances. Others rolled their eyes immediately. Nobody liked interruptions during training, especially not during an exercise that had taken hours to organize. Staff Sergeant Blake Turner turned slowly toward her. His expression made it clear he was already irritated. Turner had spent nearly 15 years training recruits. He was respected throughout the installation for his discipline and attention to standards. When he spoke, people listened. When he gave instructions, they were followed without debate. That was why the silence spreading across the range felt so unusual. Emily swallowed once, but kept her posture straight. She could feel every pair of eyes on her. "Recruit Carter," Turner said, his voice carrying across the field. "Is there a reason you just stopped this exercise?" Several recruits smirked. A few quietly laughed. Emily knew exactly what they were thinking. New recruits weren't supposed to interrupt instructors. They certainly weren't supposed to challenge procedures in front of an entire training company. "Yes, Sergeant," she answered. Her voice remained calm despite the pressure building around her. "I believe there's a problem." The reaction was immediate. Murmurs spread through the formation. Someone near the front chuckled openly. Another recruit whispered something that caused 3 others to laugh. Turner folded his arms across his chest. "A problem?" he repeated. "With this exercise?" Emily nodded. "Yes, Sergeant." The amusement on the faces around her grew stronger. The instructors had spent days preparing the range. Senior personnel had reviewed every detail. Yet somehow the newest recruit in the company believed she had discovered something everyone else had missed. Turner took several steps toward her. "You're telling me this entire exercise should stop because of something you noticed?" Emily could feel her pulse quickening. Every instinct told her to stay quiet and avoid attention. But something deep inside refused to ignore what she had seen. Around her, 50 recruits waited to see what happened next. Most already believed she was about to embarrass herself. None of them realized that the next few minutes would change everything. The laughter continued for several seconds before fading into an uneasy silence. Emily Carter remained standing exactly where she was, her shoulders square and her eyes focused on Staff Sergeant Turner. She could feel the weight of every stare on the range. Some recruits looked entertained. Others looked annoyed that their training schedule had been interrupted. A few simply looked curious. Turner studied her for a moment as though trying to decide whether she was serious or simply nervous. In his experience, new recruits occasionally imagined problems that did not exist. Training environments could be intimidating, and some people overthought every instruction. Emily, however, did not look confused. She looked certain. That was what made the situation unusual. "Go ahead," Turner finally said. "Tell us exactly what you think is wrong." Emily took a slow breath. The range stretched nearly 300 yards ahead of them. Target markers stood in neat rows beneath the bright morning sun. Instructors moved cautiously along the sidelines, waiting to hear her explanation. "The coordinates on the exercise board do not match the coordinates printed on the lane packets," Emily said. Several recruits immediately groaned. One shook his head dramatically. Another muttered, "That is what all this is about." More laughter followed. Turner glanced toward the large information board positioned near the center of the field. "Those coordinates were verified yesterday." "Yes, Sergeant," Emily replied respectfully. That is why I checked them twice. Turner narrowed his eyes. And you believe everyone else missed this? Emily hesitated. She did not enjoy disagreeing with authority. She had been raised to respect experience and follow instructions. Yet she also knew what she had seen. I believe there may have been a printing error, she said carefully. The numbers are different. The explanation only increased the skepticism around her. Recruit Daniel Brooks, one of the louder members of the company, folded his arms and laughed openly. A printing error shut down the whole exercise. Several recruits joined him. Emily ignored them. She kept her attention on Turner. The staff sergeant walked to the board and examined the posted coordinates. After a few seconds, he turned back toward her. These are correct. His tone carried complete confidence. More smiles appeared throughout the formation. To many of the recruits, the situation already seemed settled. Emily could feel the pressure growing stronger. Every second made her look more isolated. Yet something inside her refused to back down. During the previous evening, she had reviewed every page of the training packet 3 separate times. Attention to detail had always been one of her strengths. While others rushed through assignments, she checked and rechecked information until she was satisfied. It was not because she wanted recognition. It was because mistakes often began with small details that people ignored. "Sergeant," Emily said quietly, "may I show you the packet?" Turner stared at her for a long moment. The range had become completely silent again. Even the recruits who had been laughing now watched closely. Whatever happened next would determine whether Emily Carter became the recruit everyone remembered for wasting valuable training time, or the recruit who had enough confidence to stand alone when nobody else agreed with her. Staff Sergeant Turner extended his hand. "Let me see it." Emily stepped forward and handed him the training packet she had been carrying since dawn. The entire company watched as he flipped through the pages. At first, his expression remained unchanged. Calm, certain, completely convinced that the issue would disappear within seconds. Several recruits exchanged knowing smiles. Daniel Brooks leaned toward the recruit beside him and whispered something that drew quiet laughter. To them, this was already over. Emily could feel the embarrassment building around her like pressure in the air before a storm. Turner stopped at the page she had marked earlier that morning. He studied it briefly before looking back at her. "This packet was distributed to every recruit yesterday." "Yes, Sergeant. And somehow you are the only person who noticed this supposed problem?" More laughter rippled through the formation. Emily heard it, but refused to react. She kept her posture straight and her voice respectful. "I cannot speak for anyone else, Sergeant. I only know what I found." Turner shook his head and held up the packet so everyone could see it. This is exactly what happens when recruits spend too much time second-guessing instructors. A few recruits nodded immediately. The statement sounded reasonable. Turner had years of experience. Emily had only been at the training center for a matter of weeks. The imbalance seemed obvious. "Recruit Carter believes the entire training staff missed a critical error," Turner continued. "Apparently, every instructor, every coordinator, and every reviewer overlooked something that only she could find." The remark triggered more laughter. This time it was louder. Emily felt heat rise in her face, but she remained silent. She knew arguing would only make the situation worse. Turner stepped closer. "Tell me something, Recruit Carter. Are you saying every instructor here is wrong?" The question hung in the air. Dozens of eyes locked onto her. It was the kind of moment that could define a recruit's reputation for months. Emily understood exactly what everyone expected her to do. Apologize. Back down. Admit she had made a mistake. Instead, she answered carefully. "No, Sergeant." Turner raised an eyebrow. "Then what exactly are you saying?" Emily looked directly at him. "I am saying the target coordinates on the exercise board do not match the coordinates printed in the lane packet." Silence followed. Even the recruits who had been laughing moments earlier seemed surprised she had not withdrawn her claim. Turner folded the packet shut. "And you are willing to delay an entire company because of a few numbers?" Emily nodded once. "If the numbers matter, yes, Sergeant." Several instructors standing nearby exchanged glances. Most remained neutral, but a few appeared slightly uncomfortable. Not because they believed Emily was right, but because she seemed unusually certain. Turner noticed it too. "You are making a serious accusation." "I understand, Sergeant. And if you are wrong..." Emily paused. The easiest answer would have been to apologize and move on. Yet she remembered sitting in the barracks the previous evening, comparing documents line by line beneath the dim desk lamp while other recruits relaxed after training. She remembered checking the coordinates 3 times because something felt off. Most importantly, she remembered why details mattered. Then I will accept responsibility, she said. But if I am right, someone needs to know before this exercise begins. The range fell completely silent. For the first time that morning, nobody laughed. The silence lingered longer than anyone expected. Staff Sergeant Turner stared at Emily Carter as though he was trying to understand what made a new recruit so willing to stand alone against an entire training company. Around them, 50 recruits remained frozen in formation. The confidence that had fueled their laughter only minutes earlier was beginning to fade into uncertainty. Not because they believed Emily was right, but because she refused to act like someone who was wrong. Turner took a slow breath and looked again at the packet in his hand. "You understand that this exercise has already been approved," he said. "Yes, Sergeant." "You understand that multiple instructors reviewed these materials." "Yes, Sergeant." "And you still believe there is a problem?" "Yes, Sergeant." The answer came immediately. Calm, respectful, unshaken. A murmur spread through the formation. Daniel Brooks shook his head in disbelief. "I cannot believe she is still pushing this," he whispered to the recruit beside him. Several others nodded. To them, Emily's persistence looked less like confidence and more like stubbornness. Yet the more pressure she faced, the more composed she appeared. Turner turned toward the instructors standing nearby. "Has anyone else reported an issue with the coordinates?" Every instructor answered the same way. "No, not one concern, not one question, not one discrepancy." The response seemed to strengthen Turner's position instantly. The recruits noticed it too. A few smiles returned. Some appeared relieved that the situation was finally reaching its conclusion. Emily, however, felt a knot tighten in her stomach. She knew how this looked. One recruit versus every instructor on the range. One packet versus an entire training staff. Logic suggested she should back down. Common sense suggested she should apologize and move on. But the numbers still did not match. Turner walked back to the exercise board and pointed toward the coordinates displayed there. These numbers were submitted through official channels. Then he lifted Emily's packet. "And these are the numbers you believe are wrong?" "No, Sergeant," Emily replied. "I believe one of them is wrong. I just do not know which one." That answer drew a different reaction. The laughter stopped entirely. Several recruits exchanged glances. The distinction mattered. Emily was not accusing anyone of negligence. She was not claiming superior knowledge. She was simply stating that 2 pieces of information contradicted each other. Turner noticed the shift as well. For the first time, his expression softened slightly. Not with agreement, but with caution. "Show me exactly what you found." Emily stepped forward and pointed to a specific line inside the packet. Then she pointed toward the board. The difference was small. Just a single number. Easy to overlook. Easy to dismiss. Yet Emily had spent enough time reviewing details to know that small differences often carried larger consequences. Turner compared the 2 entries. His jaw tightened slightly. The recruits could not see what he was looking at, but they could see something changing. The confidence that had filled the range earlier was slowly being replaced by uncertainty. Nobody spoke. Nobody laughed. 50 recruits and several instructors stood waiting as the morning sun climbed higher above the training field, unaware that an unexpected arrival was only minutes away from turning the entire situation upside down. Staff Sergeant Turner continued studying the 2 sets of coordinates. The range remained silent except for the distant sound of equipment being moved on another training field. Every recruit watched him. Every instructor waited. Emily Carter stood motionless, resisting the urge to speak. She had already said everything she needed to say. Now the evidence had to speak for itself. Turner compared the numbers again. 1 digit. That was all. A single digit separated the coordinates on the exercise board from the coordinates printed inside the recruit packets. Such a small difference seemed almost insignificant at first glance. Yet training depended on precision. Procedures depended on precision. Details mattered. Turner closed the packet and looked directly at Emily. "Do you understand how easy it would be to assume this is simply a typographical mistake?" "Yes, Sergeant." "Then why continue pushing the issue?" Emily answered without hesitation. "Because I do not know which source is correct." The response caught several people off guard. She was not insisting that the board was wrong. She was not insisting that the packet was wrong. She was simply refusing to assume. Turner studied her expression. There was no arrogance there. No desire for attention. Only concern. The distinction mattered more than most people realized. Recruit Daniel Brooks stepped slightly out of formation before quickly correcting himself. Sergeant, with respect, we have been standing here almost 20 minutes because of one number. A few recruits nodded in agreement. They were frustrated. The morning schedule was slipping away. Turner looked toward the formation. And if that one number matters? Nobody answered. The question lingered over the field. Turner turned back to Emily. You reviewed this packet last night. 3 times, Sergeant. Several recruits exchanged surprised glances. Most of them had reviewed the material once before lights out. Some had barely looked at it at all. Emily continued. The difference stood out because every other coordinate matched exactly. Turner looked down at the packet again. The explanation was logical. Uncomfortably logical. One instructor stepped forward. Sergeant, we could contact administration and verify the original submission. Turner nodded slowly, but did not answer immediately. His eyes remained fixed on the numbers. Emily could sense the atmosphere changing. Earlier, people had laughed because they assumed the issue was simple. Now uncertainty had begun spreading through the range. Not certainty that she was right, just uncertainty that she might not be wrong. Then, from the far side of the training complex, the sound of an approaching vehicle drifted across the field. Heads turned automatically. A dark command vehicle moved along the access road before slowing near the range entrance. Several instructors straightened immediately. Turner noticed it as well. The vehicle came to a stop. The driver's door opened. A tall figure stepped out and began walking toward the training area with calm, deliberate confidence. Conversation stopped. Even the instructors seemed suddenly more alert. Emily did not recognize him, but the reaction around her made one thing clear. Whoever had just arrived carried authority far beyond anyone currently standing on the range. And within moments, the question that had divided an entire company would finally receive an answer. The man crossed the range with the kind of presence that required no introduction. Conversations ended before he came within 50 feet of the formation. Instructors straightened their posture. Recruits fixed their eyes forward. Even Daniel Brooks, who rarely seemed intimidated by anything, immediately stopped whispering. Emily Carter watched quietly as the visitor approached. His uniform was immaculate. His expression was calm. There was no sign of irritation on his face, only curiosity. Staff Sergeant Turner stepped forward and rendered a sharp greeting. Chief Instructor Reynolds. Emily immediately understood why the atmosphere had changed. Chief Instructor Michael Reynolds was responsible for overseeing training standards across the entire facility. Recruits rarely saw him directly. Most only heard stories about his attention to detail and his insistence on professionalism. Reynolds returned the greeting and looked around the unusually silent range. Why is this exercise not active? His voice was not loud, but everyone heard it. Turner hesitated for a fraction of a second. We encountered a disagreement regarding the exercise coordinates, sir. Reynolds raised an eyebrow. A disagreement? Turner handed him the packet. One recruit believes there is a discrepancy between the posted coordinates and the printed training material. Reynolds accepted the packet and glanced briefly toward the formation. His eyes settled on Emily. She suddenly became aware that 50 recruits were now looking at her again. Which recruit? Reynolds asked. Turner pointed. Recruit Carter, sir. Reynolds studied her for a moment. Step forward. Emily obeyed immediately. Her heartbeat quickened, but her expression remained composed. Reynolds looked down at the packet. You reported the discrepancy? Yes, sir. Why? The question surprised her. He did not ask whether she was right. He did not ask whether she was certain. He simply asked why. Because the numbers did not match, sir. Reynolds nodded slightly. And when nobody agreed with you? The numbers still did not match, sir. For the first time, something resembling approval appeared in his eyes. Not agreement. Not confirmation. Just interest. Reynolds moved toward the exercise board and compared it against the packet. The range became so quiet that Emily could hear the distant hum of maintenance vehicles beyond the training grounds. Every recruit watched. Every instructor waited. Reynolds examined one set of coordinates, then the other. He checked them again. Unlike everyone else, he said absolutely nothing while reviewing the information. Seconds stretched into nearly a minute. The silence felt heavier with each passing moment. Turner remained confident. but Emily noticed a subtle change. The certainty he had displayed earlier was beginning to fade. Reynolds finally closed the packet and looked toward the instructors. Who approved this version? One instructor immediately identified the administrative office responsible for distributing the materials. Reynolds nodded once. Then he asked a second question. Has anyone verified which version was updated most recently? Nobody answered. Several instructors exchanged glances. Reynolds looked back at the packet in his hands. The recruits could not see his expression clearly, but they could sense that something important had just changed. For the first time all morning, Chief Instructor Michael Reynolds was no longer examining whether Emily Carter had made a mistake. He was examining whether everyone else had. Chief Instructor Reynolds did not speak immediately. He walked toward a nearby communications station and requested access to the training database. The range remained silent as an instructor hurried to provide the information. 50 recruits stood motionless beneath the growing heat of the morning sun. Nobody laughed anymore. Nobody whispered. The mood had completely changed. Emily Carter remained at attention, her eyes forward. She had no idea what Reynolds was about to find. She only knew that the discrepancy existed. Whether it was a harmless administrative mistake or something more significant was no longer for her to decide. Reynolds reviewed several records on the screen. He compared document versions, approval dates, and revision histories. His expression remained unreadable. Staff Sergeant Turner stood nearby waiting patiently, though the confidence he had shown earlier was becoming harder to maintain. Several instructors exchanged cautious glances. The longer Reynolds searched, the more uncomfortable everyone became. Finally, Reynolds stopped scrolling. He stared at the screen for several seconds. Then he requested another file. The instructor beside him immediately opened it. Reynolds compared the two documents side by side. A long silence followed. Daniel Brooks shifted slightly in formation. He had spent most of the morning assuming Emily was wasting everyone's time. Now he found himself hoping she was wrong for an entirely different reason. If she turned out to be correct, it would mean a recruit had spotted something dozens of trained professionals had overlooked. Reynolds slowly closed the files and turned back toward the range. Every eye followed him. Turner stepped forward. Sir. Reynolds looked at the exercise board. Then he looked at the packet still resting in his hand. The board contains the previous revision. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Reynolds continued. The packet contains the updated coordinates approved 3 days ago. The words landed like a shockwave across the training field. Several recruits blinked in disbelief. Others looked toward Emily immediately. Turner stood completely still. Reynolds was not finished. The revised coordinates were entered into the training system correctly. He held up the packet. These are accurate. Then he pointed toward the board. This display was never updated. A stunned silence swept across the range. Emily felt her heartbeat quicken. She had prepared herself to be wrong. She had prepared herself to face embarrassment in front of the entire company. She had not prepared herself for this. Reynolds turned toward her. Recruit Carter. Yes, sir. When did you notice the discrepancy? Last night during packet review, sir. And what made you continue raising concerns after multiple people disagreed with you? Emily hesitated briefly before answering. Because the numbers still did not match, sir. For a moment, nobody said anything. Then Reynolds gave a small nod. It was not dramatic. It was not emotional. Yet somehow it carried more weight than any speech. Around the formation, recruits who had mocked Emily earlier stared at the ground. Others looked at her with entirely new respect. The truth had finally surfaced, and it had come from the last person anyone expected. For several seconds, nobody moved. The training range that had been filled with skepticism only moments earlier now felt completely different. Recruit Emily Carter remained standing where she was, almost uncomfortable with the sudden attention. She had not spoken loudly. She had not challenged anyone with disrespect. She had simply refused to ignore something that did not make sense. Yet that quiet decision had changed the entire morning. Chief Instructor Reynolds slowly looked across the formation. His gaze moved from one recruit to the next. Many of them lowered their eyes. Others stared straight ahead, avoiding any reaction. Daniel Brooks felt his face grow warm as he remembered every joke he had made. Earlier, he had been certain Emily was wasting everyone's time. Now he could not even bring himself to look in her direction. Staff Sergeant Turner stood silently beside the exercise board. The discovery had placed him in a difficult position. He was an experienced instructor with years of service. Nobody questioned his dedication. Nobody questioned his professionalism. Yet experience alone had not revealed the discrepancy. A recruit had. Reynolds finally broke the silence. How many of you reviewed your packets last night? Nearly every hand in the formation went up. How many of you noticed the mismatch? Not a single hand remained raised. Reynolds nodded slowly. Interesting. The word carried more weight than anyone expected. He walked toward the center of the formation. Many people assume attention to detail comes with rank. It does not. The recruits listened carefully. Many people assume experience guarantees perfection. It does not. Nobody spoke. Nobody shifted. And many people assume the newest person in the room has the least valuable observation. Reynolds paused. That assumption causes more problems than most organizations realize. His words settled heavily over the field. Emily looked down briefly before returning her eyes forward. She was not enjoying the attention. In fact, she wished the exercise could simply continue. Reynolds turned toward Turner. Staff Sergeant, update the board and prepare the corrected exercise. Yes, sir. There was no defensiveness in Turner's response. Only professionalism. Reynolds appreciated that. The best leaders did not fear correction. They learned from it. Then Reynolds looked back at Emily. Recruit Carter. Yes, sir. You remained respectful. You remained professional. And you continued to raise a concern even when nobody agreed with you. Emily swallowed. Yes, sir. Reynolds nodded once. Good. It was a simple word, but everyone heard it. Around the formation, the recruits who had laughed earlier now viewed her differently. Not as someone seeking attention. Not as someone trying to challenge authority. But as someone willing to do the uncomfortable thing when it mattered. As instructors began updating the exercise materials, the tension that had dominated the morning slowly disappeared. Yet something had permanently changed. The recruits would forget many training days before graduation. They would forget countless lectures and routine exercises. But they would remember the morning when one quiet recruit stood alone against an entire company and never raised her voice once. The exercise resumed less than 30 minutes later, but the atmosphere on the range was no longer the same. Recruits moved through their assignments with greater focus. Instructors reviewed details with renewed attention. What had begun as an ordinary training morning had quietly become a lesson that nobody had expected. Emily Carter returned to her place in formation and completed every task exactly as she always had. She did not seek recognition. She did not tell the story to anyone during lunch. She did not walk with extra confidence or act differently toward the recruits who had doubted her. If anything, she seemed relieved that the attention had finally faded. Yet the people around her had changed. During a break later that afternoon, Daniel Brooks approached her. For several seconds, he stood awkwardly, searching for the right words. Earlier that morning, he had laughed louder than almost anyone else. Now he looked uncomfortable. Carter, he said quietly. Emily looked up from the notes she was reviewing. Yes. Daniel rubbed the back of his neck. I owe you an apology. Emily seemed surprised. For what? Daniel let out a small laugh. You know exactly for what. For the first time all day, Emily smiled. It was a small smile, but it immediately eased the tension. It is fine, she said. You did not have all the information. Daniel shook his head. Neither did I, but I should not have assumed you were wrong. Nearby recruits overheard the conversation. Several nodded in agreement. The lesson had reached all of them. Later that evening, Chief Instructor Reynolds addressed the company one final time before dismissal. The recruits stood in formation beneath the fading orange light of sunset. The events of the day were still fresh in everyone's mind. Reynolds looked across the group before speaking. Today was not about coordinates. The recruits listened carefully. It was not about paperwork. It was not about a board that needed updating. He paused. It was about character. The field remained silent. Character is doing the right thing when it would be easier to stay quiet. Reynolds looked briefly toward Emily. Character is remaining respectful when people disagree with you. Another pause followed. And character is having the humility to accept correction when you discover you were mistaken. Several recruits lowered their eyes. They understood exactly what he meant. Reynolds nodded once. Remember this. Confidence is valuable. Experience is valuable. Rank is valuable. But none of those things replace attention to detail. The company stood perfectly still. The military does not succeed because people assume. It succeeds because people verify. As the formation was dismissed, recruits slowly headed back toward the barracks. Conversations filled the evening air. Many discussed the training exercise. Others discussed the lesson behind it. Emily walked quietly among them, looking no different than she had the day before. Yet from that moment forward, nobody saw her as just another recruit. They saw someone who had earned something far more important than praise: respect. And on a training field where nearly everyone had doubted her, that respect had been earned the hardest way possible.